A decades-old land theft and cover-up left truth buried and countless voices silenced. Powerful corporations and political figures, hidden behind greed and influence, worked to erase Samuel Hawke's discovery forever. But a wounded dog named Rust led veteran Tom Reynolds to an abandoned ranch where the secret lay hidden, and Tom made a choice that would change everything. Just wait until you hear how this quiet discovery turned into a battle for justice, and why it changed history forever. It started as a quiet morning in the outskirts of Carson, Arizona. The desert was painted in soft shades of gold, the first light of dawn stretching across the horizon like a promise of something new. But for Thomas "Tom" Reynolds, there was no peace in the morning air. His boots crunched on dry sand as he walked alone, his shoulders heavy with memories he could not shake. Tom was a Marine veteran, hardened by years of service overseas. He had come home searching for something he couldn't name, a place to rest, a purpose beyond survival. But peace had proved elusive. At night, the quiet of his small apartment was broken by echoes of battles past, by dreams he could not escape. In the daylight, he wandered the desert, not looking for anything specific, just moving. That morning, the stillness of the desert was broken by something unexpected, a sound, low and pained, carried on the wind. Tom paused. Somewhere ahead, between a ridge of sandstone and a cluster of scrub brush, he saw movement. A dog emerged, its coat matted with dust, one leg twisted in an unnatural way. It limped slowly toward him, eyes locked on his with a strange intensity. There was no fear in those eyes, only something deeper, almost like a message. Tom instinctively knelt down. The air between them felt strange, charged. The dog whimpered softly, shifting its weight. Then, as if deciding something, it began to move forward again, halting only to glance back at Tom. It was clear the animal wanted him to follow. Curiosity mixed with concern. Tom had never been the type to follow instincts blindly, yet something about this moment felt different. Without thinking, he rose and followed the wounded animal. They moved across a stretch of barren land where the heat shimmered in waves, where the wind carried the scent of sagebrush and earth baked dry under the rising sun. Hours passed. The dog led him farther than Tom would have dared to go on his own, deeper into the wilderness, beyond trails marked on any map. His throat was dry, his boots worn through dust, yet he kept walking. The desert grew silent except for the crunch of sand and the soft, uneven steps of the dog ahead. Finally, they came to the edge of a hidden canyon. The mouth of it yawned before him, framed by rugged walls of stone that glowed faintly in the morning light. At the canyon's heart stood a ranch unlike any Tom had ever seen. It looked as if time had stopped there. Weathered wood leaned against itself. Roof panels sagged under years of neglect. And yet there was something almost sacred about it, as though the place had been waiting. The rusted gate swung gently in the wind, releasing a creak that echoed in the stillness. Tom stepped closer, his heart pounding. His boots crunched on gravel and broken tiles as he crossed the threshold. The air inside smelled of old earth and something faintly metallic, like forgotten history. Sunlight filtered through cracked windows, casting long shadows across a floor layered in dust and time. On a table in the main room lay an object that drew his eyes instantly, a weathered leather-bound journal half buried under a thin coat of dirt. The edges of the pages were curled, brittle, and stained. Tom picked it up carefully. Opening it revealed faded handwriting, each line penned with care. The entries told a strange and haunting story of a rancher named Samuel Hawk, who had lived here decades ago and disappeared without a trace in the 1940s. Tom's chest tightened. He knew this was no ordinary find. The words seemed to whisper to him through the silence of the ranch, as though Samuel Hawk himself had left this record for someone to discover. Was this just an old diary? Or was it something more, a forgotten piece of history waiting to be uncovered? The wounded dog, lying in the corner now, gave a quiet whine, its eyes fixed on Tom. And in that moment, Tom understood. He had been led here for a reason. Something in the air told him his life was about to change. Tom named the dog Rust. The name came without thought, almost instinctively, as if the desert itself had whispered it to him. Rust's coat was tangled and dusty, patches missing, his body thin and worn. But it wasn't only the dog's injuries that drew Tom in. It was something in his eyes. They were tired, but there was trust there, too, a quiet plea for help. Tom recognized himself in that gaze. His own wounds, the invisible ones he carried from years of service, were different but no less real. He had learned to bury them deep, but they were there every morning when he woke alone. Rust, with his pain made visible, became a mirror to Tom's own. And so, nursing the dog back to health became more than an act of compassion. It became Tom's purpose. He gathered what he could from the abandoned ranch. A torn cloth became a bandage. A rusted tin from the barn held water. His fingers moved with quiet precision, pressing herbs he found growing wild into a poultice for Rust's leg. The dog whimpered at first, but settled under Tom's touch. Tom worked without hurry. For the first time in a long while, he felt steady. As Rust rested nearby, Tom returned to the journal. The brittle pages felt heavy in his hands, as if the paper carried the weight of years. He read aloud softly to himself, the words pulling him deeper into Samuel Hawk's world. The entries spoke of more than life on a ranch. Hawk wrote of discovery, of documents hidden away, proving something dangerous, something that could topple powerful forces. Land deals stretching decades back, deals tied to theft and corruption, involving names that still resonated in government and business circles. Hawk's handwriting grew tense toward the end. He wrote of secrecy, of a need to protect what he'd uncovered. And then the entries stopped abruptly, leaving questions that demanded answers. Tom's curiosity became something sharper, a kind of compassion for the man who had vanished. Samuel Hawk wasn't just a name in a forgotten journal. He was someone who had risked everything to protect a truth. And now, Tom held that truth in his hands. That evening, as the sun sank low, Tom explored the ranch more thoroughly. The barn drew him first. Its boards groaned under his weight. Inside, he noticed something strange, a set of floorboards that didn't match the rest. They were newer, oddly placed, as if covering something. Kneeling, Tom pried them aside to reveal an old iron door, sealed with locks worn by years. The metal was cold under his touch, and a faint air of mystery seemed to escape from beneath it. Rust whined softly, his gaze fixed on the door. Tom crouched beside him, studying the locks. There was no doubt. This ranch was hiding something far bigger than rusted nails and rotting wood. As night fell, Tom built a small fire. Rust lay beside him, leaning weakly against his leg. Tom glanced up at the dark outline of the ranch against the desert sky. He felt an unusual certainty settling in his chest. This was no random discovery. He had been brought here for a reason. But there was a shift in the air. A faint sound carried across the desert, not the wind, not the rustle of leaves. Something quieter, deliberate. Tom froze, his senses sharpening. Somewhere beyond the light of his fire, someone moved. Not far, but hidden enough to remain unseen. Rust's ears pricked. He lifted his head and let out a low, cautious growl. Tom's breath tightened in his chest. They were not alone. Tom sat back against the barn, his mind turning over Hawk's last words in the journal. Samuel had been hiding a truth worth guarding. Now Tom understood why. Whatever was here, whatever had been left behind at this ranch, it was powerful enough that someone else wanted it kept secret. And Tom knew deep down that compassion had led him into a danger he could no longer turn away from. Days bled into nights at the deserted ranch, each one folding into the next without distinction. Tom moved with quiet purpose, exploring every corner, every shadowed space. The journal became his guide, and Rust his quiet companion. But the deeper he delved, the heavier the weight on his shoulders became. It was clear now. Whoever had hidden Samuel Hawk's secret had done so deliberately, and they had done so for a reason. The ranch itself seemed like a trap, a place built not just to keep something hidden, but to keep people away. Tom began to notice signs of sabotage, tools missing from their places, a pile of scattered boards as though something had been torn apart, dust disturbed in corners that no wind should have touched. In the margins of Hawk's journal were faint scrawls, warnings, dates, names. The handwriting changed toward the end, becoming frantic, desperate. The words hinted at something far larger than Tom could imagine. Decades of cover-ups, land deals tied to powerful interests, corruption that had stretched through generations of government. Every revelation twisted inside him like a coil. The journal's words seemed to pull him deeper into something he was only beginning to understand. Hawk had not vanished by accident. He had chosen to disappear because he had uncovered something too dangerous to share. But danger was finding him anyway. Rust fell ill again, his breathing shallow, his injured leg swollen and cold to the touch. Tom stayed up through the nights, tending him with whatever scraps he could find. The dog's quiet whimpers became a steady ache in Tom's chest. Caring for Rust was becoming harder with each passing day, and so was keeping himself together. Tom began to doubt. He had no allies here. No one knew where he was. No one could reach him if something went wrong. His own strength, already worn thin from years of battle, was fraying. The ranch, once a place of discovery, began to feel like a prison. The isolation pressed down on him like the desert sun itself. One evening, under a sky heavy with stars, Tom sat in the dust of the barn. Rust lay curled at his side, trembling. Tom opened the journal once more. The last entry was written in hurried strokes, almost illegible. The words burned in his mind. "Truth will destroy you, but silence destroys more." Tom closed the journal and stared at the rough wooden walls around him. The silence of the ranch was no longer empty. It was full of questions and dangers. Somewhere beyond those walls, someone was aware of what he had found. Someone was watching. Fear began to creep in. Not just for Rust, or even for himself, but for what this discovery might bring. What if Hawk had been right? What if speaking the truth meant everything, his life, his future, would be taken from him? Despair settled over Tom like dust. He leaned back against the barn wall, exhausted, his hands resting on Rust's tired fur. The dog stirred, pressing closer, as if sensing his own doubts. The barn was silent except for the wind outside, whispering through broken boards. Tom's eyes drifted toward the iron door he had found earlier. Behind it was whatever Hawk had hidden. But it was locked, and with every passing day, Tom felt further from the courage to open it. Was it worth it? The more Tom thought about it, the more uncertain he became. He had been brought here by a wounded dog, led into a place heavy with secrets. Now he wondered if it was a path he was meant to walk alone, and whether he would find the strength to follow it to the end. The desert night deepened. Shadows crept along the barn walls like memories of something lost. Tom closed his eyes, resting his head against the rough wood. Rust sighed softly beside him. Somewhere in the distance, the desert whispered, and Tom knew that he could no longer ignore the truth calling him deeper into the ranch. But the cost of answering it was beginning to feel unbearable. At dawn, the desert was quiet in a way that felt almost sacred. Tom woke to the sound of Rust barking, sharp, urgent, different from any sound he had heard in days. The dog stood beside the barn, tail stiff, eyes fixed on something beneath the floorboards. Tom rose, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, drawn forward by Rust's insistence. The barn was still and dusty, the air heavy with morning light filtering through cracks in the wood. Tom knelt beside the hidden trap-door he had first noticed weeks before. Rust pawed at the boards as though urging him on. Without thinking, Tom pried at the edges. The boards shifted with effort, revealing something he had not dared hope for. An old safe, buried beneath years of neglect, sealed with locks rusted shut. Tom's breath caught. He set his shoulders, gripping the cold metal with both hands. Something in him told him this was the end of waiting. The safe yielded under his efforts with a reluctant groan. He pulled open the heavy door. Inside lay the past. Documents, photographs, yellowed maps stacked in neat piles, tied with strings brittle from age. Tom's fingers trembled as he began to sort through them. The photographs showed wide stretches of land, marked with boundaries that had since disappeared. The documents were more than personal notes. They were proof. Proof that Samuel Hawke had uncovered something enormous. A decades-old conspiracy involving land deals that had stolen territory from countless families, deals tied to corporations and political figures still powerful today. The words in the documents struck Tom with clarity. Hawke had not just been a rancher, he had been a guardian of truth. This was not just a mystery buried in time. This was history itself, waiting to be revealed. Tom sat back against the barn wall, holding a worn photograph of Hawke, staring into the camera with defiance. For months, he had wrestled with fear and guilt. He had wondered if he was chasing something he couldn't finish. But in that moment, everything changed. The answer became clear. He had to share it. Rust lay beside him, resting his head against Tom's knee, as if sensing the resolve that had settled in him. The dog's quiet presence was a reminder of what had led him here. It wasn't just about uncovering truth. It was about giving voice to the forgotten, protecting what had been lost. Tom knew it would not be easy. Whoever had hidden Hawke's secrets had done so for a reason. Powerful forces would not let them go quietly. But he was no longer the man wandering the desert without purpose. Tom was a soldier once more, not of war, but of truth. Using the few resources he had, Tom contacted investigative journalists. He handed over the documents, the photographs, the maps. Within weeks, the story broke. It spread like wildfire. The revelations shook the nation. Powerful figures who had long hidden behind walls of influence faced questions they could not answer. Lawsuits and investigations followed. The scandal became a reckoning. Tom stood back and watched it unfold, not seeking reward or recognition. His mission was complete. He had delivered the truth to the world. And Rust, the wounded dog who had led him to the abandoned ranch, became more than a companion. He became a symbol of hope, of courage, of the quiet strength that leads the lost to purpose. One morning, with the story now echoing across the country, Tom stood at the edge of the desert. Rust rested beside him, his leg healed, his eyes still full of that quiet determination. Tom knelt, resting a hand on the dog's head. "This was your path, too," he said softly. Rust looked up at him once, then turned toward the endless desert. Tom watched him go for a moment before turning away. He stepped forward into the sands, the morning light warming his face. A quiet smile broke through years of silence. History had changed, and so had he.